read your thoughts. From the future.
The movies of 1985.
Hello, and welcome to week 36 of the year 1985. That's Tuesday the 3rd of September to Monday the 9th of September, 40 years ago, or whatever it is in your time there in the future. My name is Jason Hutchins. I'm trapped in the past, and each week I rent a movie and watch it on VHS using a bingo machine to select which movie I'm going to see. It's all very complicated, but the bingo machine's right here, so let me spin it now and see what we're going to watch this week. So there's 17 balls left, and here we go. There's a number out. It is number 32. Nice round number, 32. So let me look at that up in my spreadsheet on my Commodore 64. Number 32 is The Breakfast Club. Now, this is a classic movie. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, and you can rent it on many different services in the future. Prime, Apple, Google, you name it. So I'm going to travel over. Where am I going to go this week? I'm going to go right up into Greenwood, right into Whoop Whoop Land, I think. And it's movie land up there, north of the river. So I'll venture up there and rent The Breakfast Club. While I'm doing that, let me flick on the TV and you can watch an ad.
Our kids are our future, the whole country round. Build 'em up with Milo, from the hustlin', bustlin' cities to the little country towns. Build 'em up with Milo.
Energy-giving goodness with that great chocolatey taste.
Build 'em up, build 'em up, build 'em up, build 'em
Okay, I'm back.
build 'em up with Milo.
So I'm just putting this in.
Milo makes.
It's a very pink cover, this one. Milo, hey, the breakfast of champions for kids at least. Now, I've got the Breakfast Club VHS cover in my hand. It's very pink, like I said. The title on the front is alternating pink and blue letters, The Breakfast Club. And underneath there's this strange logo that I don't remember. It's a circle with TBC inside, something you might put on a motorcycle jacket or something like that. A little logo for The Breakfast Club. I don't remember that being in the movie. I have seen it, but I think it's one of those movies that I've only ever seen all the way through once. And all the other times I've seen it, it's always been little segments that I see when I'm channel surfing. I'll catch the last half an hour of it and things like that. So on the cover, it's just the 5 Breakfast Club kids. And it's a little caption says, they only met once, but it changed their lives forever. Now, I think if they go to high school together, it's probably not the case that they only met once, but it's really more of a case that they spent the whole of a Saturday detention together. Now, flipping over to the back, we've got a couple of photographs from the movie, and then a little bit of a blurb on the back that says they were 5 teenage students, should be teenaged, faced with spending a Saturday detention together. At 7 a.m. they had nothing in common, but by 4 p.m. they had bared their souls to each other and become firm friends. John Hughes, creator of Ferris Bueller's Day Off, wrote, directed and produced this hilarious and touching comedy, starring 5 of today's hottest young actors: Emilio Estevez, Molly Ringwald, Judd Nelson, Ali Sheedy, and Anthony Michael Hall. Now, Ali Sheedy, of course, we saw just the other week in Twice in a Lifetime. She was also in St. Elmo's Fire this year, along with Emilio Estevez, I think. Or was it the other Estevez? But St. Elmo's Fire is not on my list for whatever reason. The blurb continues, to the outside world, they were simply a brain, an athlete, a basket case, a princess and a criminal, but to each other, they would always be the Breakfast Club. The theme song, Don't You, was a hit single for Simple Minds, and the soundtrack includes hits from Wang Chung, among others. We did have a Wang Chung soundtrack earlier this year, didn't we, as well? I think that was once upon a time in Hollywood, but that's not the case, is it? It was something to do with LA anyway. So a resurgence for Wang Chung. Anyway, let's sit down together and press play on tape and watch The Breakfast Club.
It is now 7:06. You have exactly 8 hours and 54 minutes to ponder the error of your ways. Any questions?
Yeah. Does Barry Manilow know that you raid his wardrobe?
A brain, a beauty, a jock, a rebel, and a recluse.
Can't believe this is really happening to me.
Before this day is over, they'll break the rules.
Chicks cannot hold their smoke. That's what it is.
Bare their souls.
I'm a nymphomaniac.
Are your parents aware of this?
Take some chances.
Being bad feels pretty good, huh?
And touch each other in a way they never dreamed possible.
Why'd you do that?
Because I knew you wouldn't.
The Breakfast Club. They only met once,
I don't want to be alone anymore.
You don't have to be.
but it changed their lives forever.
I mean, I consider you guys my friends. I'm not wrong, am I?
Universal Pictures presents Emilio Estevez, Paul Gleason, Anthony Michael Hall, Judd Nelson, Molly Ringwald, and Ali Sheedy in a John Hughes film.
Why are you being so nice to me? Because you're letting me.
The Breakfast Club.
Look, I quite enjoyed this movie, maybe more than what I expected to. And I have seen it before, but like I said previously, I think I've seen it in bits and pieces. I'm not sure whether I've sat down and watched the whole thing beginning to end before, or if I did, it was, 30 odd years ago. But I enjoyed it. I would give it 4 stars and a Mintox, I think. It really is a bit of a Gen X movie about kids and the relationship that they have with their parents. So let me just go through the first 10 minutes of the movie just to set the scene, not the first 20, because we really get into it very quickly. So we see the Universal Studios logo, but instead of hearing the music, we get the drum intro from the song Don't You Forget About Me by the Scottish band Simple Minds, which was written for this movie specifically. Now, I think that's the first time this season that we've seen them change the sort of studio's intro in that way. And that's something that would become very common in the 90s when you think of movies like The Matrix and Fight Club and things like that. When the studio's logo comes on, it's often a different color and it's using different music or something like that. This is the first time I think we've seen it in 1985. Now, after that, the song continues while we get about 2 minutes worth of credits. Just your standard 1985 credits. Black background, yellow text, all the actors, the producer, director, all that sort of stuff. And after that, we go into a bit of a quote, which sets the scene for the movie. So just white text on a black background. It's a quote from David Bowie from his song Changes. And it says, "And these children that you spit on as they try and change their worlds are immune to your consultations. They are quite aware of what they're going through." Now, that's like the little quote at the beginning of a book, isn't it? It's sort of setting the scene. And surprisingly, it turns out that this quote was printed on a black piece of glass because that then explodes and shatters, revealing the outside of Shermer High School in Illinois. And a voiceover says Saturday, March 24, 1984, and then goes on to read the essay that the kids are told to write as part of their Saturday detention. So just reads the essay, which is basically what bookends the movie, because we get that in the closing scenes of the movie as well. Now, as the essay is being read out, we get a series of stills from around the school, pictures of notebooks and graffiti on a toilet, like a bathroom stall door. We even see a computer lab with flowcharts on the blackboard and hallways of the school and lockers and all that sort of things to set the scene. And then we see this drop-off where 4 cars are dropping off 4 of the 5 kids, and we get to see a little bit inside the various families because the parents have conversations with the kids, and we see all sorts of insights into, the pressure that these kids are feeling at home. The 5th kid arrives by foot. And when I say kids, the actors were of lots of different ages, and Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall, both John Hughes, like the director is John Hughes, they were both favourites of John Hughes. They appear in a lot of his movies and in a lot of movies of this time. They were of their correct age group. They were 16 or 17 years old at the time of filming. They actually were still in high school during filming, and they had to have breaks to do their lessons and things like that. But the rest of the cast, Emilio Estevez, who else is it? Judd Nelson, and the girl, Ali Sheedy. We saw her in that other movie, didn't we? That romantic one about the guy that gets divorced, or maybe not so romantic. Anyway, they were all in their 20s, so they weren't Gen Xers. They were born in the early 60s, whereas Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall were born in the late 60s. So after 1965, I think Gen X is 1965 to 1980. So I'm firmly in the Gen X camp. So anyway, these kids get dropped off by their parents. They go inside the school. They go into this beautiful big double-story library. Now, interestingly, this movie was shot in a real high school during summer vacation or something like that. But they couldn't use the school library because it was too small for filming. So they built a set in the school gymnasium, which was this massive library looking very convincing, with, 10,000 books that were donated by other local schools and things like that. So they go into the library, they take their desks, and then the supervising teacher walks in. We recognize him as the police chief from Die Hard, if you're a Die Hard fan like me. So he walks in, and there's no music or anything like that. So there's a lot of squeaking shoe leather. So they had fun with the ADR and the sound effects on this movie, I think. Sort of putting you in that mood of a kid that's going to Saturday detention at 7 a.m. and it's just going to be a super boring way of spending your Saturday. So the teacher gives them an essay. So we've already heard their essay being read out over the opening credits. So the teacher gives them an essay to describe who they think they are. And then the teacher walks out and the kids start interacting. I think he's the principal, not the teacher. And straight away, this character of Bender, that's the Judd Nelson character, he comes across as being super annoying. He's a bit of a school bully. Of course, that ends up being due to what's happening in his home life with his father. So anyway, that sets things up. We've got the kids, we know what they're doing, they're in detention, and it very much runs like a stage play from then on because it's just 5 actors. We do have the principal and the janitor making an appearance, so maybe 7 actors, but they're all in the same location and they're all having all sorts of emotional outbursts and things like that. And then at the end of the movie, it's bookended. So we get the same music as the beginning, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. The parents collect them and we get the essay read out for a second time. And then there's a bit of a famous fist pump at the end. Now, this teacher I said, or the principal, was played by the same guy. I don't have his name in front of me, but you know who I'm talking about. It's the police chief from Die Hard, the one that says, we're going to need another couple of FBI agents. Now, in the movie, I found it quite interesting because he said in the movie that he gets paid $31,000 per year. Now, that would be the equivalent of $93,000 today. But today, the average salary of a teacher in the United States is only $66,000. So it's barely doubled since the year 1985, which is shocking. I thought that was rather interesting. So, highlights of the movie, I think Emilio Estevez getting stoned and doing an interpretive jazz routine is a bit of a highlight. Another big moment, of course, is the makeup scene where Molly Ringwald does the makeup of Ali Sheedy, and of course she's meant to transform into this beautiful young lady, but really her whole goth look was a lot more interesting. I think I might have had a crush on her back in the day. And what else? Yes, I think so. It's interesting. Bender was such an annoying character, and Judd Nelson was a bit of a method actor. So he was 24 years old playing a 17-year-old, but he stayed in character even when the when the cameras weren't rolling, much to the annoyance of everybody, just constantly bullying the 16-year-old Molly Ringwald. And John Hughes, the director, became so furious at him that he was on the verge of getting fired and replaced. And Molly Ringwald and the rest of the cast had to band together and make the case to keep him on, together with the principal, played by Paul Gleason. Actually, it is not someone who I recognise, but a lot of these actors. I think Paul Gleason is no longer with us, but Molly Ringwald and also what's his name, this Anthony Michael Hall. They were really the part of the Brat Pack in the 80s. They were in all the teenage movies, but they've gone on to have long careers just as working actors. They're not sort of famous in the way that other actors are, but they are always doing something right up until this year. So anyway, all of these actors banded together and got Judd Nelson to stay on. So that's interesting, isn't it? So Ali Sheedy called this a bit of a powwow to resolve the conflicts. And it kind of echoes the theme of the movie of all the outcasts supporting one another. Now, the film's signature song, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds, it wasn't written by them. And they actually rejected the whole idea of recording a song that they hadn't written themselves, even though it was written for them, just with their sound in mind. But after they rejected it, it was offered to Brian Ferry. He rejected it. It was often offered to Billy Idol, who also rejected it. All British performers, Simple Minds from Scotland, of course, but they all turned it down as well. And then it was only because Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders, she was married to someone was in Simple Minds. She insisted that they reconsider. And so the band reluctantly agreed, recorded the song in 3 hours. It went to number 1 on the Billboard charts, and it recently passed 1 billion streams on Spotify and really is the band's most well-known song. So kind of crazy how those things turned out, and kind of crazy to think that this movie is bookended by that song. They really trusted in the fact that it would be a popular song. Imagine if it hadn't been. Imagine if it didn't strike a chord with the audience. The movie would have bombed as well, wouldn't it? And it does remind me a bit of Back to the Future in the way that the song is such an important part of the movie. Now, in a 1999 interview, the director, John Hughes, of course, he's known for all sorts of classic movies from the 80s, including Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Planes, Trains and Automobiles and Uncle Buck, I think, and 16 Candles. He revealed that all of these movies take place in the same universe, in Chicago, or in Illinois, I should say, where the characters from the movies all cross paths in real life. In his universe, I mean, they all know each other and so forth. Even though the same actors in 16 Candles and this movie, it doesn't really work, does it? But apparently he spent 15 years writing a huge backstory about Shermer's history that connects everybody together. Anyway, that's what I'll leave it on. 4 stars from me. Go and watch The Breakfast Club if you haven't seen it before. Share it with your teenaged kids. They would probably like it as well. But now...
I'm driving along and I'm just singing my song. I'm in a news-free zone.
Well, welcome to the News-Free Zone, everybody. It's that time of the podcast where we look back at the news from 1985, so we don't have to look at the news from 2025. Now, in the news this week, 1985 saw the debut of a sitcom called Small Wonder, which is all about, a little bit like Metal Mickey last week, it's all about an engineer called Ted Lawson hiding his robot daughter, VICI, or Vicky, apparently standing for Voice Input Child Identicant, from his nosy neighbours. Now, this is a sitcom I remember seeing a little bit back in the 80s, and it is, I guess, predicting the future that we live in 2025 with a lot of AI around and quite likely a bit of robot help entering the home in the next couple of years, or at least if YouTube is anything to go by. Now, this week in 1985, Starship's We Built This City entered the Billboard Top 100 at number 73. It would eventually reach number 1. And before being voted the worst song of all time. And I probably would be close to agreeing with that, although Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire would have to be a close tie for second place. Now, We Built This City was rejected by the Australian artist John Farnham for his album Whispering Jack, so Starship recorded it instead. And it really is a song of its time, isn't it? Now, in Australia, John Howard replaced Andrew Peacock as the Liberal Party leader in a bit of a leadership spill, which would have big consequences because John Howard would go on to become Australia's second longest running Prime Minister. Now, the Liberal Party was really trying, they were struggling to counteract the very, very popular Labor government led by Bob Hawke. You think about what was happening in Australia at the time compared to Reagan's US and Thatcher's Britain. Bob Hawke was quite a different leader, wasn't he? Now, speaking of President Reagan, he signed an executive order this week in 1985 placing economic sanctions on South Africa's apartheid regime, something which the US had hesitated to do. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu didn't mince words, criticising America for not placing sanctions and not doing more, calling Reagan a crypto-racist. I've heard of crypto-fascist, but crypto-racist. We've got to bring back that term, don't we? Who doesn't care two beans about black people in South Africa. Now, Reagan had been busy this week because earlier this week he responded to Mikhail Gorbachev's groundbreaking interview with Time magazine, which was the Soviet Union's first interview with Western journalists. And, Gorbachev demonstrated detailed knowledge of America in this interview. And he was nicknamed the Great Communicator by Washington Post, which mirrored Reagan's own moniker. So obviously Reagan had to respond to that. Now, air disasters, they happen heaps in 1985, and there was another one this week. 31 people were killed in a flight that took off from Milwaukee, just a small domestic flight. Just crazy. All of these airline disasters. It's amazing. Also, Reagan, in the third big thing that he did this week, he transmitted the Vienna Convention for the protection of the ozone layer to the Senate for ratification. And this was a huge international agreement, probably the most successful environmental treaty, even to this day, where all the countries of the world ratified the Montreal Protocol, limiting the use of CFCs to help close the hole in the ozone layer, which still floats above me as we speak. I need to remember to put on more sunscreen. Anyway, we should now go over to Usenet News. And it was interesting because there's just still so much conversation about the Amiga being released. And I realized that this week in 1985, the fifth issue of Zap 64 magazine came out. And the Commodore 64 was only 3 years old at this point, if that. So it hadn't been out for too long. And yet the Amiga was already coming out. It's amazing in retrospect how quickly the technology changed. Now, of course, in 1985, I still didn't own a Commodore 64. I'd started a newspaper around this time to save up the $400 I needed, and I didn't get my Commodore 64 until 1986 when the Amiga was well released. But yeah, Zap 64 magazine had only begun back in May, so the fifth issue came out this week, and that had Birth of a Paradroid, which was the diary by Andrew Braybrook about the development of that game. It featured Summer Games 2 in a 4-page spread, a big review of Rescue on Fractalis by Lucasfilm Games, and a preview of the upcoming game Mercenary, which I loved. But also this week, the first shipment of 35,000 Amiga 1000 computers was made to various suppliers around the United States. So it is such an interesting time with the Commodore 64 at the peak of its popularity. It's probably even more popular in 1986 and 1987. But the Amiga was already out. Just amazing. My timeline's crazy. Anyway, reading Usenet this week, I spotted 2 smileys. So it is interesting that people are starting to use the emoticons a bit more. Two, I tell you. So over on net.games this week, Kit Kimes described an upcoming release by Infocom called A Mind Forever Voyaging, written by Steve Meretsky, the co-author of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy text adventure game. Now, that was an interesting game because it puts you in the role of an artificial intelligence which is simulating a society of the future to sort of figure out whether government policies were going to result in a utopia or a dystopia. So you would play through one generation and then you would fast forward to another generation and so forth. And it was kind of a reaction to Reagan's America. But in an interesting piece of serendipity, I've started listening to this podcast called My Perfect Console by someone called Simon Parkin. And I chose to start listening with episode 24, which is where he interviews someone called Sam Barlow. And he talks about his love for A Mind Forever Voyaging. So if you want to, Sam Barlow is the guy that did the game Papers, Please and Her Story. So if you want to go and listen to someone talking about this game that came out in 1985, then I would recommend that podcast. So what was interesting as well is in Kit Kimes' post on net.games, he said that this text adventure was going to be released for the Apple, the IBM, the Atari ST, the Macintosh, and the Amiga, not released for the Commodore 64 or other 8-bit computers because it required 128K of memory, and it was being released for $44.95, and that is equivalent to 200 Australian dollars today. So can you imagine paying for any game, let alone a text adventure game, at that at that price. It's just crazy. Everything's crazy this week. So on net.general, Paul Kemp described reading an article in IEEE Spectrum all about the Usenet, written by R.W. Lucky of AT&T Bell Laboratories. So that's an article I'm going to track down and read just to see what people were saying about the social media of 1985 back in the day. On net.sf lovers, that's science fiction lovers, Chuck von Rospach posted the list of the 1985 Hugo Award winners, which he copied from a local BBS. Now, on that list, the best novel was Neuromancer by William Gibson, a novel which I find a little bit difficult to read, but it is, it is a very important book because it really is the beginning of the whole cyberpunk genre, isn't it? And that sort of made its way, that and Blade Runner, which was, came out, a couple of years beforehand, maybe. They made their way into Japanese culture and shaped the development of a lot of anime, I think. And the best movie was 2010 Odyssey 2, which came out in 1984. And it was up against a lot of other 1984 movies, including Ghostbusters, Star Trek 3, Dune, the David Lynch version of Dune, and The Last Starfighter. So it would be interesting to look at some 1984 movies. They're all pretty good, aren't they, in one way or the other? Now, let me just end with a little bit of Pepys from his diary in 1665, 360 years ago, where they talked this week about wig anxiety. So, as you know, you think about all these guys walking around in 1665 in their powdered wigs, and there was a rumour spreading around in London that the Black Plague could travel in your wig hair. So it was called periwig panic, the fear that fashionable wigs might carry the infection. So the other thing that happened this week in 1665 is the Lord Mayor declared that we should burn down parts of London in a desperate attempt to purify the air. Now, the Great Fire of London doesn't happen just yet. That happens famously next year in 1666, which puts an end to the Black Plague. But right now, there's a few experimental burn-offs to try and stop the plague's spread. A little bit of germ theory would go a long way, I think. Anyway, that's all from me this week, so please don't forget to rewind.